Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening a file on a figure who represents, well, maybe the single greatest statistical anomaly in the history of literature.
That's a big claim, but I think you might be right.
I mean, usually when we talk about Nobel Prize winners, we're talking about a certain kind of person. There's a path.
Oh, absolutely. The classic ivory tower trajectory.
Hmm.
University educations, literary salons, lives spent in libraries surrounded by first editions.
Right. A life of the mind from day one.
Hmm.
But today we're talking about a man who, and this isn't a metaphor, quite literally had grease under his fingernails for a significant portion of his adult life.
Yeah. We are talking about José Saramago.
The first, and so far the only, Portuguese language writer to win the Nobel Prize in literature.
And the journey to get there is, frankly, baffling. If you pitch this as a movie script, it just wouldn't get made.
Hollywood would reject it.
They'd say it's unrealistic. A landless peasant who trains as a locksmith and a mechanic, who then stops writing for nearly 30 years, and then, in his 60s, becomes a global literary superstar. It doesn't happen.
It sounds like one of his own parables. And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here, biographies, critical essays, his own journals, and we really need to answer one specific question.
How does it happen?
How does a car mechanic become the man who writes, as the Nobel Committee put it, parables sustained by imagination, compassion, and irony? How does that specific background create that very specific and, let's be honest, often difficult genius?
It's a great question, and I think it starts with the name itself. You really can't understand Saramago without understanding that his very identity began as a mistake.
A mistake.
A bureaucratic error rooted in poverty and maybe a little bit of wine.
This is the wild radish story. I read this and I had to read it again because I thought I must have misunderstood. It feels almost too perfect for a writer who spent his whole life critiquing bureaucracy. So walk us through how he actually got his name.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1922. We're in a tiny, tiny village called Azenhaga in the Ribatejo province of Portugal.
And we need to be clear about what this place was like. We're not talking about a wealthy region.
No, not at all. This is deeply rural, deeply poor. His father is José de Sousa. The family are landless peasants, which is, the bottom of the economic ladder.
Right.
And in this village, like in many poor communities, families had nicknames to distinguish them from each other, because there were probably a dozen other de Sousa families.
And these nicknames weren't always complimentary.
Almost never. They were often quite derogatory. And his father's family was known by the nickname Saramagos.
Okay, and Saramago isn't just a random sound. It means something very specific in Portuguese, doesn't it?
It does. It refers to the plant Raphanus raffinistrum, the wild radish.
The wild radish.
It's a weed, basically, a weed that grows in the fields. And historically, in times of famine, it was gathered and eaten. It was considered poor man's food.
So calling someone a Saramago.
It was essentially calling them a weed. It was a slur about their poverty. It was a constant reminder that they were the people who were just barely scraping by, the ones who had to eat the weeds from the fields.
Oh, wow. That gives it a real sting. Okay, so his father, José de Sousa, goes to the registry office to record the birth of his son.
And the clerk of the registry was, by all accounts, either incredibly careless or, more likely, a bit drunk.
As you do.
The sources suggest he might have had a bit too much wine, which, wasn't exactly uncommon in village administration back then. So when he sat down to write the baby's name in the ledger, he didn't just write José de Sousa.
He ad-libbed.
He took it upon himself to add the insulting village nickname. He officially wrote down José de Sousa Saramago.
And the family had no idea.
None. They didn't find out for years. Not until he was 7 years old and had to present his official identification papers for primary school.
Oh my God, imagine that moment.
Imagine the shock. You think your name is one thing your entire childhood, and then some state official tells you, no, actually, your legal surname is this insult that people in the village use behind your back.
That feels like the first Saramago moment before he ever wrote a single word. It's this crisis of identity, this absurdity imposed on him by a faceless, careless bureaucrat.
A drunk bureaucrat, no less.
You can just see how that would plant a seed of deep skepticism about authority, about official documents, about the truth as it's written down by the state. It's almost Kafkaesque, but in this rural Portuguese setting.
It is. It's the perfect origin story. But what's amazing is how he reclaimed it. He took the name of the weed, the name of the peasant food, and he made it the most prestigious name in all of Portuguese literature.
He wore it like a badge of honor.
Absolutely. It kept him grounded. He never, ever let people forget that he came from the earth, from those wild radish roots. It became his way of saying, I am not one of the elites. I am not from the academy. I am one of you.
So let's dig into those roots a little bit more in section
Hmm.
1, because that poverty wasn't just, a colorful backstory. It dictated the entire trajectory of his life, especially his education.
It was completely deterministic.
He's born in 1922. The family moves to Lisbon in 1924 so his dad can get a job as a policeman. But even then, they're not living the high life.
Oh, far from it. They were still struggling immensely, living in cramped quarters, just getting by. And this leads to the first major divergence in his life path from what you'd expect.
He was a good student, right?
He was a brilliant student. By all accounts, his grades were excellent. He was sharp. He was curious. In any normal timeline for a future Nobel laureate, he goes to grammar school, what they call the lycée, and then on to university.
That's the path.
That's the path. But his parents literally could not afford the fees for the grammar school.
Wow, so it was purely economic.
Purely. It wasn't about talent or aptitude. It was about money. And this is that sliding doors moment. Because of a lack of funds, the door to the humanities, to a classical education, slams shut in his face.
And in its place, the door to the trade school opened.
Exactly. At age 12, he's sent to a technical school. And the curriculum isn't Latin, philosophy, and literature. It's metalworking. It's mechanics. He's being trained not to think, but to do. He's being trained to be a laborer, to work with his hands.
Which he does. He graduates, and for 2 years, he works as a car mechanic. I can't get over that image. Fixing transmissions, changing oil.
It's incredible. But, and this is the detail I absolutely love, the thing that shows the writer was always in there, he spends his nights haunting the public library in Lisbon.
So he's got 2 lives, grease-stained hands by day, ink-stained hands by night.
It's a beautiful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
He didn't have a syllabus. He didn't have a professor telling him what to read. He just had a library card and this voracious, untamed curiosity. He was autodidactic in the purest sense of the word.
Just reading whatever he could get his hands on.
Randomly, voraciously. And I honestly think that lack of a formal academic training
Yeah.
is what saved him, in a way. It's what made his style so unique.
Oh, so?
Because he wasn't taught how to write by a professor. He wasn't told what the rules were, so he didn't have the same fear of breaking them. He learned by absorbing the rhythm of the masters on his own terms, while his day job was all about the physical, tangible world. That combination is potent.
But there is a very specific emotional anchor from this time, something that feels more important than any book he could have read. We have to talk about the grandfather story. The sources all highlight this as maybe the definitive Saramago moment.
It is the absolute key to his emotional landscape, to who he was as a man and as a writer. So he would spend his holidays back in the village, as in Haga, with his grandparents, Geronimo and Josefa.
And these were not literary people.
These were illiterate pig farmers. And when I say pig farmers, I mean they were so poor that in the winter they would bring the piglets inside and sleep with them in their own bed to keep them from freezing to death.
That shows such an intense proximity between human and animal life. There's no separation there, no sense of superiority.
None whatsoever. It's all just life trying to survive. But the pivotal moment comes when Geronimo, his grandfather, suffers a stroke. He's an old man and it's serious. He needs to go to Lisbon for surgery.
Oh.
And Geronimo, this rough, uneducated, illiterate peasant, he understands the truth of the situation with perfect clarity. He knows he's going to Lisbon to die. He's not coming back to the farm.
He's facing his own mortality. So what does he do? Does he go to the church?
No. He doesn't go to the church to pray. He doesn't write a will. He has nothing to leave and can't write anyway. He does something else. He goes out into the yard, into his small plot of land. There are fig trees and olive trees there that he has planted and tended his entire life. And he goes to each tree one by one. He wraps his arms around their trunks. He embraces them and he cries. He is saying goodbye to the trees.
It's just an incredibly cinematic image, but also so deeply spiritual in a way that's completely non-religious. It's like he's thanking the earth itself for sustaining him.
It's a communion. And the young Saramago witnessed this. He saw it with his own eyes. And he later wrote a sentence that I think explains everything about him. He said, to see this, to live this, if that doesn't mark you for the rest of your life, you have no feeling. Wow. It wasn't just a sad goodbye for him. It was a profound lesson. It taught him where true value lies. Not in abstractions, not in God or heaven, but in the tangible world.
It explains so much about his later work, doesn't it? You see that theme constantly, that the most profound human experiences are physical, not abstract. They're about the earth, the body, the immediate, touchable reality. It's a kind of materialist spirituality. He didn't need a cathedral. He had the olive tree. That groundedness, that connection to the physical, is what prevented his later high-concept novels from just floating away into pure fantasy.
Right.
Even when he's writing about impossible things, the emotions are as solid and real as that tree trunk. It gave him a kind of litmus test for truth. Does this feel as real as my grandfather hugging those trees?
Speaking of his writing, we have to address what I call the great gap. Because usually a writer starts young, they struggle, they publish a few things, they slowly build a career. Saramago published his first novel, Land of Sin, in 1947. He was 24. And then, crickets. Nothing.
Silence, absolute literary silence, at least in terms of novels, for almost 30 years. It's unheard of.
Why? What happened? Did he just give up? Did he think he was a failure after that first book?
It wasn't really failure so much as a moment of profound self-awareness. He famously said later, "I had nothing worth saying."
That takes a lot of humility. Can you imagine the self-awareness required for that?
Mm-hmm.
To realize that you have the technical skill to write sentences, but not yet the wisdom or the life experience to write a meaningful novel. So he stopped, and he lived.
You got other jobs?
He worked in the civil service. He worked in a publishing house as a production manager. He became a journalist and a translator. He lived through the Salazar dictatorship, the Estado Novo. He basically just let life fill up the reservoir.
It's a great lesson for late bloomers everywhere. He didn't really have his major breakthrough until Balthazar and Bluemunda in 1982.
He was 60 years old.
60. Most people are starting to think about their retirement plans. Saramago was just starting his literary revolution.
And because he waited, he arrived fully formed. He didn't have to experiment in public. When he returned to the novel, he brought that distinctive, difficult, mesmerizing style that he's famous for. He had spent decades listening to the way people really talk, working with official documents, seeing the absurdities of bureaucracy from the inside. All of that experience poured directly into his style.
Okay, let's transition right there. Let's talk about that style. Section 2, what I like to call the wall of text. Because if you're a new reader and you pick up Blindness or The Stone Raft, the first thing you notice is that it looks terrifying to read.
It is visually dense. There's no other way to put it. You open the page and you see these huge, solid blocks of text. Very little white space. It looks like a brick of words.
And the punctuation. Or the lack of it.
Right.
It's like he has a personal vendetta against quotation marks.
It really does feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
He called his own method just enough punctuation. He essentially eliminates almost all the standard conventions of dialogue that we're used to.
No quotation marks.
No quotation marks. No new paragraphs when a new speaker begins. No semicolons. No em dashes to indicate a speaker.
So how on earth do you know who is talking?
You have to listen. You have to pay incredibly close attention to the rhythm of the language. He separates different clauses, including dialogue, with commas. The only visual cue you get that the speaker has changed is a capital letter immediately following a comma.
So it would read something like, "Hello, how are you? I am doing fine, thank you. Where are you going today? I am going to the market." All in one long, flowing, run-on sentence.
Exactly that. And sometimes those sentences can run for pages, not just paragraphs, but entire pages.
Okay, so the big question. Is this just him being difficult? Is it a kind of literary gatekeeping, a barrier to entry? Because frankly, it kept me away from his books for a long time.
It definitely acts as a filter. There's no doubt about that. It demands a lot from the reader. But it's not a gimmick. It's actually an invitation.
An invitation to what?
An invitation to experience language differently.
Yeah.
Saramago himself, and most critics agree, explained that this style mimics oral storytelling.
Ah, like listening to someone tell a story.
Precisely. Think about when you're telling a story to a friend over dinner. You don't say open quote and close quote.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pause for a paragraph break. Your voice just flows. The narrator's voice seamlessly blends into the characters' voices and back again.
So it creates this continuous stream of consciousness.
I'd call it more of a river of consciousness. And you, the reader, you have to jump into that current and just let it carry you. You can't stop and start easily. It forces a state of total immersion.
You can't be distracted while reading it.
You can't. And that's intentional. The critic James Wood had a great description of Saramago's narrator. He said the voice is like someone both wise and ignorant. We are figuring things out with the narrator in real time. It creates this profound intimacy. Because you have to pay such close attention just to follow the dialogue, you become deeply, deeply invested in the characters' voices.
It also has a huge effect on how we view the characters themselves, doesn't it? Especially in a book like Blindness, which we'll get to in more detail later.
Yeah.
He takes it a step further and stops using proper names entirely.
Yes, that's another layer of his technique. In Blindness, there is no John or Mary. There is the doctor's wife, the girl with the dark glasses, the old man with the black eye patch, the boy with the squint.
It feels like a fable or a myth.
Right.
Like we've stepped out of modern specific times and into something more ancient and universal.
That's precisely the point. It universalizes them. If you give a character a specific name, a specific job, a specific address, they become a specific person in a specific city. But if you call her the doctor's wife, she could be anyone. She could be your neighbor. She could be you.
It strips the character down to their essential human condition.
Yes. And it fits perfectly with his themes of urban alienation, that in modern life, we are often just functions bumping into each other. We are our jobs or our most visible characteristic. But by the end of the book, by forcing you to know them only by these labels, you come to care about the doctor's wife more deeply than you care about fully named characters in other books. It's a brilliant paradox.
Okay, so we have the peasant roots, the long 30-year gap, and this dense, oral, challenging style. Now we need to look at what he actually wrote with that style. Section 3, the major works. Because his premises are, well, they're wild. They're completely out there.
They are what-if questions, taken to their absolute logical extreme. He's often lumped in with the magical realism movement, with writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But I think Saramago is doing something quite different. He isn't really writing magic. He's writing logic puzzles. He takes one single, impossible premise and then applies rigorous, almost scientific logic to it to see what happens.
Let's start with the one that really broke him through internationally. Balthazar and Blamunda, published in 1982.
This is the one that really put him on the map. And on the surface, it's a historical novel, but it's twisted through his unique lens. It's set in 18th century Lisbon during the height of the Inquisition.
So the backdrop is incredibly dark.
Very dark. You have the auto da fe, people being publicly burned at the stake for heresy. It's a brutal, oppressive world. But at its heart, the story is a romance. It's about Balthazar, a soldier who lost his left hand in the war, and Blamunda, a young woman who has a very special power.
She's a clairvoyant, right? She can see things others can't.
Specifically, if she hasn't eaten breakfast yet, if she's fasting, she can look at people and see their wills inside their bodies. Not their future, but their inner essence, their life force, which appears to her as a dark cloud.
Wow, okay. And somehow this connects to a priest who wants to build a flying machine.
That's the third part of the triangle. They get involved with a renegade priest, Bartolomé de Guzmán, who dreams of flight. And this is actually based on a real historical footnote. There was a priest who designed an airship called the Passarola.
But Saramago takes that historical fact and asks the magical question.
He asks, okay, but how does it fly? And in the book, the machine is powered by these wills that Blamunda harvests from people. It flies on human desires, this beautiful, strange, incredible mix of historical grit and metaphysical fantasy.
It sounds like he's trying to rewrite history to include the people who are usually left out. The maimed soldiers, the women with strange gifts, the dreamers.
That is exactly what he's doing. He's subverting the great man theory of history. The official story of that time is that the king is building the massive convent of Mafra. But Saramago ignores the king and focuses on the thousands of anonymous laborers who are hauling the stones, dying in the process. It's a very Marxist retelling of history, but done through the language of a fairy tale.
Okay, let's move forward a few years to The Stone Raft from 1986. I think this might be the funniest and also the most weirdly prophetic concept he ever came up with.
It is absolutely brilliant. The premise is geological, but all of the implications are political. The book begins when a crack suddenly appears in the earth along the Pyrenees Mountains.
The border between Spain and France.
And the entire Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, physically breaks off from the rest of Europe.
And it floats away.
It becomes a giant stone raft drifting aimlessly out into the Atlantic Ocean.
It's basically Brexit before Brexit even existed as a concept, but it's literal.
Laughs. It is. It's uncanny. But for Saramago, it was all about identity. He was a lifelong proponent of something called Iberian federalism. He believed that Spain and Portugal had much more in common culturally and historically with each other and with their former colonies in South America and Africa than they did with France, Germany, and the rest of Europe.
They were the periphery, looking in.
Exactly. So by floating the entire landmass away, he forces the characters and the reader
Yep.
to ask, who are we if we are not European? What is our identity if we are just us? It's geography as destiny, completely rewritten.
It's such a playful way to tackle a really serious political and philosophical question. Instead of writing a dry political manifesto about the EU, he writes this absurd, fantastic story about a country sailing away.
And that is the Saramago method in a nutshell. Use the impossible to reveal something profoundly real.
Then you have The Year of the Death of Ricardo Reis from 1984. This one feels a little more, I don't know, inside baseball for literature fans, but the central concept is just so trippy.
It's a metafictional masterpiece. And to get it, you have to know a little bit about Fernando Pessoa, who was the other giant of 20th century Portuguese literature.
Pessoa, who had all the alter egos.
Exactly. He didn't just use pseudonyms. He created what he called heteronyms, entirely separate authorial personalities with their own biographies, writing styles, even astrological charts. One of the most famous was Ricardo Reis.
And in Saramago's book, this fictional person outlives his own creator.
That's the premise. The real author, Fernando Pessoa, dies in 1935. But his creation, his heteronym Ricardo Reis, somehow survives for one more year and returns to Lisbon. It becomes this incredible ghost story about literature itself. Reis wanders the city, which is on the brink of fascism, and has long conversations with the ghost of Pessoa.
So he's asking what's more real, the flesh and blood author who dies or the character who lives on forever in the minds of readers?
Exactly. It's Saramago having this profound, imaginative conversation with his literary ancestors, questioning the very nature of reality in fiction.
But the big one, the one that probably got most of you listening interested in Saramago in the first place, is Blindness from 1995.
Ensayo sobre ceguera. Yes.
Yeah.
This is the heavy hitter. This is the book that usually hooks people for life or turns them away forever. There's not much middle ground.
The premise is terrifyingly simple. A mysterious plague of blindness suddenly strikes an entire city, but it's not darkness. It's white blindness.
A milky sea of white, as he describes it. It's a blindness that illuminates rather than darkens, which is a terrifying idea in itself, and it spreads like a virus through sight.
Right. One man goes blind in his car at a traffic light. The man who tries to help him drive home goes blind. The ophthalmologist who treats him goes blind. It's instantaneous and inexplicable.
And the government, in its wisdom, panics. They round up the first victims and anyone they've had contact with, and they throw them into a disgusting, abandoned, insane asylum to quarantine them.
And things go full Lord of the Flies almost immediately.
It is a brutal, unflinching examination of the fragility of civilization. Saramago is asking a very simple question. How many missed meals, how many days without sight are we away from becoming animals?
And the answer is, not many.
Not many at all. Inside the asylum, society completely collapses. Gangs form, food is hoarded, women are systematically abused in exchange for food, sanitation disappears. It is visceral and disgusting. And he does not spare the reader any of the horrifying details of the filth and degradation.
But there is a single point of light in all this darkness, the doctor's wife.
The only person in the entire world, it seems, who keeps her sight. And she fakes being blind so she can go into the quarantine with her husband. She becomes the witness. She carries the terrible burden of seeing the horror when no one else can.
It's a story about responsibility, then. If you are the one who can see, you are obligated to help those who can't.
It is. It strikes that perfect Saramago balance between total pessimism about society as a whole and a deep, abiding optimism about the capacity of certain individuals for love and compassion. Society collapses into barbarism. But the small group of characters we follow, led by the doctor's wife, they learn to love each other. They become a true family in the midst of all that filth.
That's the Saramago paradox right there.
It is. He's a self-confessed pessimist who believed that love was the only thing that could save us. He believed that when you strip away all the institutions, the police, the government, you are left with the raw human animal, and that animal is capable of the most profound cruelty, but also the most profound tenderness.
And then just to show he could, he flipped the entire script again in 2005 with Death with Interruptions. Instead of a plague of blindness, you get a plague of immortality.
Death takes a holiday. That's the premise. In an unnamed country, on midnight of January 1st, people just stop dying.
Which on the surface sounds like paradise, the ultimate human dream achieved.
You would think so. But Saramago is a master of logistics. He's not interested in the philosophical idea. He's interested in the practical consequences.
So what happens?
Chaos. If no one dies, what happens to the hospitals? They fill up with people in permanent comas, in the final stages of terminal illness
Yeah.
just suspended. What happens to the funeral homes and the life insurance companies? They go bankrupt overnight. Families are stuck taking care of ancient, decrepit relatives who just will not pass on.
And what happens to the church? To religion?
That's the big one. That's his real target. The church panics. Because without death, there is no resurrection. Without resurrection, there is no Christianity. The entire philosophical and theological foundation crumbles. It's an incredibly witty and savage satire of bureaucracy, religion, and politics.
And speaking of satirizing religion and politics,
Mhm.
we cannot talk about Saramago for this long without getting into the weeds on the trouble he caused. This man was a magnet for controversy. So let's move into section 4, the provocateur.
He didn't just court controversy. He saw it as his civic duty. He was not a writer who was content to hide away in his study. He was out in the street, metaphorically and literally.
Let's start with his politics. He wasn't a casual, champagne socialist.
No, he joined the Portuguese Communist Party in 1969. And we have to remember the context here. This was under the fascist Estado Novo dictatorship of Salazar. Joining the Communist Party wasn't just a political preference. It was an illegal, subversive act. It was dangerous. You could be arrested, tortured, or disappeared by the PID, the secret police.
And he remained a member of the party until the day he died. He described himself as a libertarian communist, which that sounds like a contradiction in terms to a lot of people.
It does, but for him it meant a commitment to Marxist economic principles, combined with a deep skepticism of authoritarian state power, like what he saw in the Soviet Union. He was a very heterodox communist.
But there was a specific incident early on in 1975 that kind of haunts his reputation, the hot summer.
Right. So after the Carnation Revolution in 1974 overthrew the dictatorship, Portugal was in complete political chaos. There was a real power struggle between the moderate socialists and the hardline communists. And Saramago was, at that time, the assistant director of a major newspaper, Diario de Noticias.
And the paper became a mouthpiece for the hard left.
It did. And in that highly charged atmosphere, there was a purge.
A purge of journalists.
Yes, 24 journalists at the paper who were seen as bourgeois or right-wing were publicly denounced and expelled. And Saramago, as part of the leadership, was deeply implicated in that purge. He was seen by many as the enforcer of the party line.
So he was actively involved in suppressing dissenting voices.
That is the accusation, and it's a serious one. He later claimed he didn't order it directly, but he certainly supported the political environment that allowed it to happen. It was a revolutionary time, and he was a revolutionary. But it's a black mark for many.
And the irony is it backfired on him completely.
Totally. When a far-left coup failed in November 1975, the political pendulum swung back hard the other way. Saramago was unceremoniously fired from the newspaper.
Which, bizarrely, is the only reason he became the novelist we know today. He got fired from his day job and had nothing else to do.
Exactly. It's one of history's great ironies. If the communist revolution had actually succeeded, we might never have gotten blindness or the stone raft. We would have just had Saramago, the newspaper editor. Instead, he was unemployed in his mid-50s and decided, okay, I'm finally going to dedicate myself to literature.
But that political controversy, as intense as it was, really pales in comparison to the religious one. He was a militant, outspoken atheist, and in 1991 he dropped a cultural bomb called The Gospel, according to Jesus Christ.
This was the absolute turning point of his life. In this book, he doesn't just satirize the church, he rewrites the New Testament from a humanistic perspective, and he humanizes Jesus to an extent that the Catholic Church found profoundly blasphemous.
What were the specific things that triggered them so badly?
Oh, where to begin? Well, for starters, in his telling, Jesus is conceived not by the Holy Spirit alone, but because Joseph has a dream and mixes his blood with the earth. Jesus later lives with Mary Magdalene as his lover. But the biggest, most unforgivable sin in the eyes of the church is the portrayal of God.
God is the villain of the piece.
God is depicted as a cruel, vain, manipulative power broker. There is a famous, shocking scene where God and the devil are in a boat with Jesus floating in a sea of mist, and God explains his grand design to Jesus. He explains that he needs Jesus to die to found a great religion, and he needs that religion to have martyrs and inquisitions and holy wars so that his power can expand across the earth.
Wow.
And Jesus is horrified. He tries to back out. He tries to quit the crucifixion, to refuse his role in this bloody plan.
So he challenges God's morality.
Yes. The book portrays the divine as capricious and cruel, and the human, Jesus, as the one with true compassion. It's a total inversion of the official story.
I can imagine the Catholic Church in a deeply Catholic country like Portugal was
Hmm.
not amused.
They were absolutely furious. But the real issue wasn't the church's reaction. It was the government's reaction. This leads to the infamous censorship incident of 1992.
Right.
The book was nominated to be on the shortlist for the European Aristean Prize, a huge literary honor.
Yeah.
But the conservative Portuguese government, led by Prime Minister Aníbal Cavaco Silva, took an unprecedented step. They used their veto power to physically remove the book from the list of candidates.
A government actively blocking its own country's most famous writer from winning a prestigious European award.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cavaco Silva went on the record and said the book was religiously offensive and that it did not represent the values of Portugal. He essentially said, "We are a Catholic nation and this book is an embarrassment to us."
That is just stunning. It's state censorship, plain and simple, in a modern European democracy.
Saramago was beyond devastated. He felt profoundly betrayed by his own homeland. He gave this heartbreaking press conference where he basically said, "I have been stabbed in the back. I cannot live in a country that treats its writers this way." So he packed his bags.
He went into exile.
A self-imposed, voluntary exile. He and his wife, Pilar del Rio, moved to the island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, which is Spanish territory. He lived there for the rest of his life. He never lived in Portugal again.
He just walked away. That shows an incredible amount of conviction.
Or stubbornness. He was a famously stubborn man. But he saw it as a fundamental principle of artistic freedom.
But he didn't stop being provocative, even from his island exile. He got himself into massive trouble again in 2002, this time on the international stage, regarding Israel and Palestine.
This was perhaps his most inflammatory moment of all. He visited the city of Ramallah during the height of the Second Intifada as part of a delegation of international writers. He was horrified by what he saw: the Israeli military presence, the checkpoints, the destruction.
And he made a public statement.
He did. And he made a comparison that you just don't make. He compared the situation in the Palestinian territories to Auschwitz.
Oh, okay. That is the third rail of any political commentary. You do not make that comparison lightly.
It sparked a global firestorm of outrage. Jewish organizations around the world condemned him. He gave an interview where he said the Jewish people were endlessly scratching their own wound to keep it bleeding, and they show it to the world as if it were a banner. He was widely accused of anti-Semitism.
Did he ever retract it? Or apologize?
Not really. He clarified it, but he didn't back down.
Yeah.
He said later that he obviously didn't mean Ramallah was literally a death camp with gas chambers. He called that interpretation stupid. But he insisted that the spirit of Auschwitz, what he saw as the spirit of exclusion, of dehumanization, of collective punishment, was present there.
He admitted he did it on purpose, right?
He did. He said he intentionally wanted to put my finger in the Auschwitz wound because he knew it was the only way to get a powerful reaction, to force people to look.
He wanted to provoke.
He believed the writer's job is not to be liked, is to be a gadfly, to shake people out of their complacency. He didn't care if you called him an anti-Semite or a Stalinist. He cared if you were listening. He felt that as a citizen with a global microphone, he had a moral obligation to scream about what he saw as injustice, even if he was clumsy or offensive in how he did it.
And yet, despite all the powerful enemies he made, the church, his own government, the pro-Israel lobby, the literary world, eventually had to bow down. Which brings us to Section 5, the Nobel Prize.
1998. The ultimate validation.
Where was he when he found out? The story is so perfect.
It's the most mundane setting for such a life-changing event. He was at the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany. He wasn't even at an event. He was literally in the airport, about to board a plane to go home to Lanzarote.
Just a regular traveler at an airport date.
And suddenly his phone rings, and he's the Nobel laureate in literature.
The committee's citation praised his parables sustained by imagination, compassion, and irony.
Which is just the perfect summary of his work. But even the prize itself was controversial. It wasn't universally celebrated. The Vatican issued an official statement criticizing the award. They called it ideologically slanted.
Yeah, they just couldn't let it go.
Never.
But Saramago's response to the Vatican is one of my favorite quotes of all time.
That's classic Saramago. He just shrugged and said, the Vatican is easily scandalized. They should just focus on their prayers and leave people in peace.
Focus on your prayers. It's so beautifully, brutally dismissive.
It shows his confidence by that point. He had the Nobel Prize. He didn't need their approval or anyone's approval anymore.
We should take a moment to talk about the person who was with him through all of this turmoil. His second wife, Pilar del Rio.
A crucial figure in his later life. She was a Spanish journalist, 27 years younger than him. They met in the mid-'80s and married in 1988.
And she wasn't just his partner.
No, she was his professional partner, too. She became his official translator into Spanish. And that was huge. That's what opened up the massive Latin American market to him and really helped make him a global phenomenon.
That's such an intimate partnership. She's literally translating his thoughts, his unique voice, into her own native tongue.
She was fiercely intelligent and fiercely protective of him and his legacy, because he lived in exile in Lanzarote in a Spanish-speaking environment. She was really his bridge to the daily world. There's a wonderful documentary about their later years called José and Pilar, and you really see this dynamic. He's the grumpy, pessimistic genius, and she's this force of nature, this whirlwind of energy, managing his life and keeping the world at bay so he could write.
And he kept writing right up until the very end. There's actually a fascinating story about a lost novel that really connects back to his early days of struggle.
Claraboya, which means skylight. He wrote this novel back in the 1950s during that long, silent gap. He was unknown, unpublished, and he sent the manuscript to a publisher in Lisbon.
And they ghosted him.
Completely. Never replied. Not a rejection letter, not a phone call, just absolute silence. He never heard a word.
So what happened to it?
She moved on with his life and forgot about it. Decades later, in the 1990s, when he's world famous, the publishing house is moving offices, and someone finds this old, dusty manuscript in a drawer. They realize what it is, and they call him up, all excited, basically saying, "Hey, we found this lost masterpiece. We'd love to publish it now."
I bet they would. That's a guaranteed international bestseller right there.
And Saramago said no.
He turned them down.
He flat out refused to publish it during his lifetime. It was a matter of dignity and principle. He basically told them, "You ignored me for 40 years. I will not give you the satisfaction of profiting from me now." He stipulated that it could only be released after his death.
Wow. He held a grudge for half a century. That is an impressive level of commitment.
He was a man of very strong principles.
Yeah.
And pride.
He died in 2010 at his home in Lanzarote.
From leukemia. He was 87. And by all accounts, it was a very peaceful end. The story is he had breakfast, he chatted with Pilar for a while, said he felt unwell, lay down, and just slipped away.
But the drama, the politics, it didn't end with his death. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the funeral. This really brings the whole political story of his life to a head.
His body was flown back to Lisbon for a state funeral. And it was a massive public event. The reports say 20,000 people lined the streets to pay their respects. But guess who didn't show up?
It has to be Aníbal Cavaco Silva.
The very same man. The prime minister who censored his book back in 1992 was now the president of the Republic of Portugal. And he refused to attend the funeral of his country's only Nobel laureate.
That is an incredible level of pettiness.
He released a statement saying he never had the privilege to know him.
The only Nobel winner in your country's entire history, and you skipped the funeral because of a 20-year-old beef over a book.
And the people on the streets noticed. The mourners were holding red carnations, the symbol of the 1974 revolution, the symbol of the communism that Saramago championed. And they were shouting at the official motorcades, asking where the president was. It turned the funeral into one final political protest.
So even in death, he was this figure dividing the establishment from the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the burial itself, that's the part that brings us full circle.
Yeah.
Right back to Section 1 and his grandfather.
The olive tree.
They buried his ashes in Lisbon, in the square in front of the Saramago Foundation headquarters. But they didn't just put a tombstone there. They went back to his home village of Azinhaga.
No way.
Yes. They dug up a 100-year-old olive tree, transported it all the way to Lisbon, and planted it directly over his ashes.
The same kind of tree his grandfather embraced.
The very same. So he rests in the heart of the capital city, but he is under the roots of his peasant history. He is literally returned to the earth he came from.
That's pure poetry. It's the perfect ending. It honors the little boy who watched his grandfather say goodbye to the world by hugging a tree.
It seals the entire narrative. The wild radish returned to the earth.
So, after all this, what is the final takeaway here? We've looked at the mechanic, the communist, the atheist, the Nobel winner. Who was this man?
I think the takeaway is all about the idea of sight. Saramago once said, "I think we are blind people who can see but do not see." And his entire life's work was an attempt to make us see.
He stripped away the grammar to make us really see the words. He stripped away the proper names to make us see the people underneath. He stripped away the comforting myths of religion to make us see our own raw humanity.
Exactly. He challenges us, he forces us to look at what he called the illusory reality, to stop accepting the official story, whether that story comes from the church or the state or even the basic syntax of our own language, and to look at the raw, messy, complicated, often ugly human truth that's hiding underneath.
He was a pessimist who gave us the tools to understand our own darkness.
And in doing so, he offered a very strange and difficult kind of hope. Because if we can truly see the darkness, if we can look at it without flinching, then maybe we have a chance to navigate it.
So for you listening, the challenge is pretty simple. Pick up one of his books, but be warned, it requires your full attention. Which one would you say they should start with?
I think if you want the romance and the history and the magic, you start with Balthazar and Blamunda. If you want the terrifying socio-political thriller that will keep you up at night, it has to be Blindness. And if you want to laugh at the absurdity of bureaucracy, you pick up Death with Interruptions.
Or if you just want to see a whole country fall apart and float away, which feels pretty relevant these days, you go for The Stone Raft.
Just don't let that first page of dense text scare you off.
No. Once you find the rhythm, once you let yourself fall into that river of his voice, you won't want to stop. So go find an old olive tree, sit down, and start reading. Thanks for diving deep with us.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next one.